Hello, everybody. This is Rob Fredette with the podcast HODGEPOD. I have another special guest on my podcast. Joining me for episode 104 is Jim Eaves. He's from across the pond in England. He's the host of the Honest Filmmaker podcast. He's also a filmmaker, and he's done some great films. The Witch's Hammer and The Apocalypse Box are just to name a few. I watched The Apocalypse Box last night before coming on the show. Wow, I was just blown away by it. But Jim also lectures on film topics and financing, production, and distribution for independent films or indie films. And Jim, welcome to my podcast. I'm honored that you're on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. That was a great introduction.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So first of all, introduce yourself to my audience, and then we'll talk about the movies of horror and sci-fi and things like that. So go ahead, please.
Sure. Okay. So as you mentioned, I'm a film director based in Southampton in the UK. I've done maybe 7 feature films. They've all been released. And the last one is The Apocalypse Box, which is the one you watched the other night. So you can, if you're in the US, you can watch that on Amazon Prime and also on Tubi for free on Tubi. So get on Tubi, have a look at it. It's a political horror thriller story about a cross-section of society get invited to try a magic box on the night before an election. And obviously, in a horror movie, if there's any wishes involved, you know those wishes don't quite go to plan. So that's the film that's just come out. Some really good performances in it. So I urge you to check that out if you sounds like it's the sort of thing you're into. And the other thing is I also host the Honest Filmmaker podcast, which is all about creative careers. So it's for people who want to either move into, or if they're a student, maybe they've just left university or college and they want to have a creative career. Each week I speak to somebody from a different creative industry, mostly film and television, but I also speak to like published authors, people like that. But I've spoken to costume designers, fight choreographers, indie filmmakers, stuntmen, prosthetics people, the whole lot. So you've got an interest in a creative career, it's called The Honest Filmmaker because I ask them absolutely everything. I ask them stupid questions, but I ask them questions that I think people might want to ask with no knowledge of that topic. So it's really about arming people with career knowledge. When I left university many moons ago, and even now I find this, younger people have got a really good grasp of technology, cameras and equipment, but actually having a career, dealing face-to-face with people and networking are things that people really struggle with. So it's something we sort of identify and try and deal with on the podcast.
Yes, I listened to one of your episodes on networking. Networking is so vital if you want to enhance your career in some form or fashion. I did watch The Apocalypse Box last night, and talking about that movie, that came out last year, but I was at the edge of my seat all the way to the end. I recommend watching it. It was a tremendous movie. Talk about that, because that must have been you're in like one section of this room here, but talk about that, because that really was very suspenseful.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. It's essentially, there's a lot of horror movies like this out there where you get people stuck in a room, which is the essential plot. So something like my favorite horror film would be The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a version of this. It's kind of like paranoia creeps in, people trapped in a room, and also probably like yourself in America, in England, in France, everywhere around the world, politics just seems to have gone bananas, and you've got people with differing opinions on both sides. And I wanted to try and get all those people in one room and add the element of horror in there. So it's a little bit of an allegory for the voting box. So when you go and vote, you're kind of making a wish, and sometimes that wish turns out well, sometimes it doesn't. And I got some awesome actors from the UK. We did a really sort of wide casting search for these guys, and I think hopefully you'll agree there's not a dud in the bunch. They're all really, really good.
Yeah,
and they really
amazing.
Yeah, they really help sort of make you feel the pressure of being in that room and the temptation, a little bit like the ring in Lord of the Rings, the temptation to use that box and make your wish.
Yes. So talk about filmmaking. I've talked to filmmakers and actors on my podcast, and there is a lot that goes on behind the finished product, which I didn't realize. And one of the things I've always intrigued me is background actors are so vital to a film as well. But talk about all the people that get involved with filmmaking, because it is the final product is the result, but there's so much behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. And also the filmmaking process, it's a long old game. I mean, you said the film came out August last year. I think it hit Tubi in September, but you're talking 2 or 3 years before that is when I sat down and started writing the
Hmm.
script. Then you have a year of pre-production, sort of assembling your team, getting everyone ready to shoot, casting. Then you shoot the film over a 2 week period or a month. And then you've got another year of post production. So you get people in who are color grading the movie. We edit the movie. We add the special effects. So there's loads of people involved in a feature film. Background artists, super important and not an easy job as well, because if you stand out, you're kind of doing the wrong thing. You need to be, you're almost part of that set to be a background artist. So if you get a background artist who sticks out, that's a problem. And I do hope that isn't something that AI comes along and replaces, because, if it's a scene, say it's a coffee shop scene, I've seen some AI tests of where they've stuck in a couple of people in the background. And at the moment you can tell because they're sort of mill around in a non-human way, but soon you won't be able to tell the difference.
Yes, that's tremendous. I never thought about that after watching movies all these years. I always look at background actors to see what they're doing. It's pretty fun. So, so talking about what makes the horror sci-fi genre so popular nowadays, now with AI and all the graphics design that they can do on films, what makes it so popular now? Because a lot of the films right now are out there, like I can't think of them off the top of my head, but there are quite a few out there. But what is the big key to the genres being so successful and popular?
I think for me, horror is popular because it's scary and it's visceral and it really engages you when you're watching it, a good horror movie. Sci-fi, fantasy, I don't know. I feel like maybe these days everyone wants a bit of an escape from the real world. They want to kind of experience other worlds and futures and fantasy worlds. And it's become a lot more popular than ever. And I remember when I was at school, fantasy, sci-fi, even superhero movies was something, the nerds were into. I was into it. It was something to sort of be ashamed of almost. Whereas now it's mainstream, it's popular culture. Every movie is either a Marvel movie or a sci-fi fantasy. Even films like Wicked, that's kind of a fantasy movie, even though it's a musical. So it's very much something that people are really interested in at the moment.
I was getting ready for this podcast. I grew up, I went to movies all the time in the 80s and 90s, and I can remember the sci-fi movies, if I would do it, or action sci-fi, would be like with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Predator, Total Recall, and Terminator 1 and 2. When you look back at those movies, and I was watching Total Recall the other night, getting ready, and I had to get back into it, seeing the movie. A lot of that stuff that they were doing in 1990, that's like AI when you look at it now. It's amazing that 30 some odd years ago, that film had things that when they had Sharon Stone playing tennis, I don't know if you've seen the movie, and it was like a hologram working with her. And now you see that all the time now with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. You do get science fiction does give you a little peek into the future. Sometimes they get it wrong, and sometimes their hopes for the future are maybe a little bit too early. So you look at something like 2001. Unfortunately, we're not all traveling through space in giant spaceships, but some of the science from that sort of seems to work with the way the ships work. But yeah, Total Recall, absolute classic. All that whole period of films for Arnie was amazing, and I think he's on my. There's a few people who have been on my top list of people I'd love to meet. I've met a few of them, but I think Arnie's up there because, like you, I think that when you say 80s, he's the person I think of. And it's funny you should mention Terminator 2. So we're into the 90s there. But I've got a podcast coming up where I interviewed John Schlag, who was one of the computer effects guys on Terminator 2. So obviously that film, when it came out, was revolutionary. He also worked on Jurassic Park, a complete game changer. So that's a really interesting chat with him about that period of time. And that was his first movie he ever worked on as well. I mean, imagine that. Your first film you work on is Terminator 2. Nuts.
I remember seeing that movie when it came out in 1991. I believe it was like July 4th holiday weekend or holiday time. And I remember standing in line waiting to get in. And that movie was just incredible. Like you said, the effects and how it was a very scary movie when you're looking at it. Like the cop Robert Patrick, he was totally like indestructible throughout the whole movie. But when you think of Schwarzenegger, one thing I like about those three movies is, one, he was leading a group of army military people in Predator, and then Total Recall, he's on his own on this recall dream, and then Terminator 2, he's a cyborg. He's just like the thing from way in the future. So it's really amazing how he played those characters, like different characters. And Total Recall had a lot of funny humor in it, which I really liked. He was great. I mean, you have to have the perfect actor. Schwarzenegger was the perfect actor for all those films. He nails all those genres.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he's quite good at comedy as well, I think. Yeah. He's he's quite adept at that, and proved that he was more than just a muscle man. Managed to, like you say, do those three films, and then Kindergarten Cop was kind of like a comedy. He even did Junior, where he was pregnant. Jingle All the Way is a good Christmas film. Do you know what I mean? He's had a lot of movies that I love, and he's even good in bad movies. If you see a bad movie with him in, he'll be the best thing in it usually.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So other movies I remember from the 80s were Nightmare on Elm Street was a classic one, which was a scary movie. And in the 90s, Scream, the horror movie, those really took the nation by storm. I remember Nightmare on Elm Street, just how scary that was. But Scream in the 90s, really, people were flocking to the theaters to see that one.
Yeah, absolutely. There do seem to be movies that kind of, especially in horror, that sort of change the game. So you've got something like Nightmare on Elm Street, came out of nowhere, awesome movie. The Scream franchise kind of was more self-referential, postmodern, kind of looking back at the old horror movies. Then you go forward to something like Blair Witch Project or Paranormal Activity, and suddenly we're actually in the horror movie. Do you know what I mean? It's so real. It's like we've shot it ourselves. So God knows what's next, but I'm looking forward to it.
What were some of your inspirations growing up? You've directed 7 films. What were some of your inspirations as you were growing up to get you to this point?
So I've got a letterbox. So if anyone wants to check out my letterbox, you can see on there my top 5 films. I think obviously Star Wars has had a massive impact on me. Absolutely love it. Cut me open. I've got Star Wars written inside me. So Star Wars has been a big part of my life. I also like Brian De Palma films. So I like Blowout, and also what else has been an influence? There's a film called Strange Days. Have you seen that? It's a Catherine Bigelow film. It's from a James Cameron script. Really good. That deals with recording memories. So science fiction. That's a classic. And I love Tim Burton movies as well. I think that's had an impact on me. Some of his earlier work, definitely. The kind of mixture of design and set, and that sort of graphic artist being brought to life through cinema. It's amazing.
You had mentioned Jurassic Park earlier, and that movie just at that time in 93 was, like you said, it was a groundbreaking movie, but some of the scenes that they had with those dinosaurs were just off the charts. The one scene that really is amazing is when, I believe it was the T-Rex, when he was looking inside the car with the young girl with the flashlight. That really that put fear and horror into that whole movie, that scene right there with the eye. I mean, we'll talk about that movie if you would.
Yeah, that film was another one that sort of changed the game, and I think really sold computer effects. It really made CGI something that you could think, oh, okay, this is believable. And the other thing is you look back at it, if you watch it now, it still holds up. Jurassic Park, the effects still hold up. I went to see it recently. My son's obsessed with dinosaurs. We saw a 4D version, where the seats move, they spray you with water and all stuff like that. It was amazing. It was amazing because he'd never seen it at the cinema. And you watch it, you're like, this is a really good movie. And it is a popcorn movie, but it's not throwaway. It's beautifully shot, beautifully paced. So yeah, absolute classic. And going back to Terminator 2, you reminded me, I think I was too young to go and see it, 'cause it was a 15. And I remember I was maybe 13. I remember dressing up with my dad's, dinner jacket on, or a leather jacket or something. I thought maybe look old, and went with my brother and kind of managed to get in to see it. So yeah, love both those movies.
Yeah. Terminator 2 at that time was just a tremendous movie, and we talked about that earlier. So when you talk about other movies in the 80s, another one which was a sci-fi was Tron. They had a remake of it or earlier, probably in the last few years, but that movie was based off a video game, if I'm not mistaken. And that movie also had the effects. It was like it was in neon light. So it's amazing how movies transform. Talk about, if you would, like maybe I've always said in the future that if when our actors and actresses are long gone, who knows, they may make AI movies with them at their younger. Have you ever thought about that? Like regenerating or reinventing the actors? I don't know if that sounds crazy, but actors who pass away, they may have a movie with them with another actor, actress, AI. Would you ever see that coming with AI? Because some of the stuff
100%.
is unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. I know they've done tests, and the theory is 3 or 4 years from now, you're going to be able to go home and say, I want to see a romantic comedy with Reese Witherspoon and me. I'm going to be in it. And AI it's got a record of you. It knows Reese Witherspoon. It's got your voice. It knows how romantic comedy works. You'll press a button and you'll be able to watch that while you're eating your dinner. So I think that's coming. Wow. It's a bit scary as a filmmaker to know that's coming, because I'm not sure how that's going to affect the industry and people's jobs and all that kind of stuff. At the moment, it's kind of like a curiosity. Can they get it to work and be believable enough? But yeah, I think that's the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, absolutely. They'll be able to bring people back. Even now, we're getting asked. So AI companies are asking filmmakers if they can use their films to train their models to create, film. So to create virtual actors. And to be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I know that my wife does photography, and I've got a friend who's an artist. And when you look at the way AI scrapes all of those professions and uses them, it's kind of like an undiscovered country. We don't know where it's going to go, and we don't know how it's going to be controlled in a way that it's not ripping off other people's ideas and work.
Yeah, you could probably make a movie with Sylvester Stallone and Bette Davis and call it like,
yeah.
So that's it. I don't know. That may be coming, but that's just like amazing. I saw something on Threads on a couple of days ago, and they had this AI where these adversaries in movies were taking selfies together, and they played it with a song. But it was amazing. They had like 10 clips. They had Silence of the Lambs, Jodie Foster, and the actor, his name,
Anthony Hopkins. Yeah,
there you go, Anthony Hopkins. Then they had The Matrix with Keanu Reeves' character, and also the gentleman, the machine that was chasing him. They're all taking selfies, and they even had Drago and Stallone taking selfies, and they all looked exactly. And they had Terminator as well. Linda Hamilton taking a selfie with the Terminator, and the Terminator looking at it. It's amazing. That's why I asked you that question, because it's very scary in some respect.
Yeah, definitely. It is something that's moving so rapidly. It's going to be hard to figure out where it goes, and like I say, what limits we place on it.
And also, there was when you look at AI, just probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was a movie that came out, The Irishman, and they made like Joe Pesci, Al Pacino, and Robert De Niro. They made him look younger in the movie, in that movie. And then also, there's a movie out now with Tom Hanks called Here, I believe it is, and it shows stages in life, and it's amazing. They go back to Tom Hanks when he was in his younger days, like bosom buddy days, and it's just amazing how that AI generation is really like. People love nostalgia, and I think that's why that movie's so popular.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's a sense with that of, it's, to me anyway, it's more motion capture, because you're still retaining Tom Hanks's performance. You're still retaining Joe Pesci's performance. You're just putting a layer, like it's almost computer makeup on them to make that work and make it look like they're younger. And I do wonder whether you'd ever be able to get a performance out of an AI Tom Hanks the same as you would a Tom Hanks that's been digitally altered. I don't think so, but who knows?
So talk about, what does your day consist of? Like, with you've done 7 films. What does average day for you consist of? Were you thinking about future projects? Are you working on one currently right now?
So at the moment, we're in the stage with the Apocalypse Box where we're promoting. So we're pushing it out. We're doing our own marketing to try and get as many eyes on the film as possible, get reviewers involved, get people watching the movie. Currently filming a short film project, and I'm also working on a book. So that's kind of keeping me popped up at the moment, because the temptation as a filmmaker, especially an indie filmmaker, is you finish a movie, move straight on to the next one and kind of leave the other one out in the wilderness. But you've got to actively get people to watch it and promote it. Otherwise it won't get seen, because there's so many films out there.
Yeah, there are so many films. We'll talk about the movie experience where people go to see movies. When I go see a movie, it's just, again, to get away for a couple of hours. But talk about that, if you would. Is that something that you think about when you're making your movies? Like, people escape for a couple of hours and you walk out and like you're rebooted.
Yeah, it's a different world now than it was. So something like the Apocalypse Box, the only time it's going to get seen in a cinema is probably at a film festival. So it's very much, it is a movie made for streaming. So it's made for you to watch at home. And I know the danger with that is people might second screen. They might be looking at their phones while they're watching the film. Or also you've got adverts popping up the whole way through. So that is something I am conscious of. The cinema experience I love, and I make sure I go. Last film I saw was Nosferatu. And I do think that's important, that cinema experience, being in the dark, cut off from phones, devices, and really getting sucked into a story. But then I'm quite fussy with cinema. I like it silent. I don't want anyone eating near me or talking. I'll walk back. Myself and my wife, we'll go in the daytime, because that's when it's empty. There's not loads of people there, unless it's a big movie where, you know, like a comedy where you want to feel other people laughing and engaging with it. For the most part, I just want my own little world. Don't want to be bothered by anyone. I don't want to know there's anyone else in the cinema.
Yeah. So talk about what other genres do you like as well? I know you're really keen on horror and sci-fi. What other genres do you like to watch, and do you look at it with a critical eye, or do you watch it as a consumer?
A bit of both. I do enjoy a good musical. I like a thriller, all sorts of genres really. But I think it's hard when you've written a couple of scripts and you know how the sausage is made. It's easy, and I drive my kids nuts, to sort of pick out kind of what's going to happen in the story, and sort of, if I'm not careful, ruin the twist. So you see these little things at the beginning of the film that kind of point to what's going to happen. And most films have the same sort of structure to them, so you can sort of see where it's going to end up. Oh, sometimes you get surprised, but yeah, and I love Marvel movies as well. I'm obviously a big comic book nerd when I was younger, so really into anything Marvel.
Going back to the Apocalypse Box, when I was watching it last night, getting ready for this, everything that happened to me while I was watching, I wasn't expecting at all, and which I found to be awesome. Everything that, they're in this room, I won't give away too much, but whatever happened in the next sequence of scenes, I was not expecting, and it was just awesome. So if you need to see it, you can get it on Amazon, you can rent or buy it. But that was just a tremendous film where you can actually, I was at the edge of my seat last night. It was amazing.
That's exactly what I want to hear.
That's
good. That's good.
I was like, what is going on here? I was like, I did not expect that. And the whole storyline was really awesome. What was, going back to that, the actors and actresses you had on that, how long did it take to film that movie?
So we shot that the main shoot for that was over, I think, 2 weeks. So we've got the lady who plays Helena in the film, Corinne Wicks. She's a UK soap star. So she was I'm trying to think what sort of program you'd liken it to over there, but she was in a program called Doctors, which was like a daily medical drama thing that ran on the BBC for maybe 5 years. She was in that. And she also did one of our big soaps. And I've worked with her before. My last film, she was the lead in that. And then we've got lots of really good character actors. We've got Jack Mariner Brown in there. He's brilliant. We've got Ariana Neo. She's a new actress. Russell Biles. And we've also got Lola Knight. So we've got, and Chris Wright, should mention him. He's a really good actor. He plays the guy with the glasses, the sort of evil politician bloke. And obviously Tom Butcher plays our kind of right-wing candidate for PM.
He was very convincing. I was like, I did not expect any of that during the film. He was a great prime minister. He was really awesome. But
He knows how to play a villain, doesn't he? He's a good
yeah,
villain.
he was like they seemed like kind of like at the beginning of the movie, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa. I was just like, it was great. Piers Stonesmith was his name. He was a right-wing politician.
Yeah.
Talk about also, if you would, are you a Beatles fan?
Yeah, I like the Beatles. Why is that?
I always talk to people when I talk. I've had a few guests on from me. I always ask about the Beatles. What do you like about the Beatles?
I think that's an interesting question. I think those songs will always be good songs, beautifully written songs, and there's so many of them as well, so many classics. When you look back, I mean, we watched the other day, and I think this might have been the first time the kids have been kind of exposed to their music. Have you seen the film Yesterday, the Danny Boyle film?
I have not seen it. No, I've seen Hard Days.
So you should watch it. So yeah, Yesterday. So it's about a guy who he's a Beatles fan and he's like a musician and he gets hit by a bus and he wakes up the next day and no one's heard of the Beatles. No one knows who they are. No one's heard their songs, but he knows all their songs. So he starts to pretend that he wrote all their songs, and you see everyone's reactions to those songs.
Mm-hmm.
Like nowadays, it's a really good movie, and it also reminds you when you hear those songs, like, oh, that's a classic, that's a classic, that's a classic. So yeah, love the Beatles.
Yeah, I listen to them all the time. So what is it about what's different? How often is it hard to break into the American market for movies, or how's that going? I know is there any obstacles with the US market, or how's the US reception been?
US has been good. It's a big market and it's very much got an appetite for horror. So US is good. The harder ones to get into is probably Asia, maybe like some of the smaller European territories, because obviously your film's going to be dubbed or subtitled, and that's another thing that AI is going to fix. So you can now get your film translated in the actor's voice, and AI will also replace the mouth movements. And trust me, I've seen a test of it. You would not see the difference. So you can put your film in and it will come out and they'll all be speaking Mandarin, and you wouldn't know that none of them could speak Mandarin. So that's something that's going to help filmmakers reach a wider audience with their films. And also soon you'll be able to have a Zoom call. You'll be able to have someone on your podcast from, I don't know, Japan, and they will be speaking English because Zoom will be translating it in AI, and you won't know the difference.
That's unbelievable. Because I'm over here. It's 7. Let's see what time it is. It's 7:30 in the morning here in the U.S. And you were what, 6 hours ahead? It's amazing. Just technology. You and I are speaking right now. It's pretty awesome. Like we're like, you could be in the United States in the next town over. That's how we sound right now. It's amazing. And you just mentioned Star Wars earlier. You look at the graphics and the technology back in the mid 70s to now. It's really come a long way, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But then what I love about the original trilogy is the use of models and the use of in-camera trickery, because I think you really things feel a lot more sort of like you can reach out and touch them, because I love all the movies. The prequels, I'm not such a big fan because I think they lent too heavily into green screen. Nothing was really there, and the actors, you can sort of tell that they're acting opposite nothing. Whereas the original trilogy and the new ones are a little bit more tactile, a little bit more real life. I love all the puppets and again, I've interviewed a guy on Ollie Taylor on the podcast who's done a lot of puppetry work, and he worked on, I think, The Last Jedi as a puppet artist.
How hard is it to get? I've always wondered, how hard is it to get actors and actresses to come on your movies, to act in your movies? Is that a hard process? Do you have to go through agents and things? I always like the inside baseball of that.
It's the hard part is finding the right actors for the roles. So there's a lot, probably the same in your country. There's a lot of people out there who want to be actors. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to choose from, but you have to work hard, not only to find the right actor for the part, but like with the Apocalypse Box, we've got maybe 8 or 9 people that all need to fuse together to work for the film. So not only have they got to be good in their role, they've also got to be the right mix so that palette works as a whole film. So with the Apocalypse Box, it was a challenge, and actually finding the right people. We did so many. Another thing this technology has allowed is us to do online auditions, get people to send tapes in, which is very much how it works at the moment. But that did enable us to go, right, we're narrowing it down from, say, we had 100 people apply for one of the parts, narrow that down to the top 5, audition them, right? Okay, 2 of them are really good. Now we'll put those 2 with the 2 best parts for the other part, and we'll kind of audition them opposite each other to find out how to get that mix right. So it's a difficult process, casting, but it really does save you time and energy and effort and pain when you get on set, because you know you've got a good actor who can deliver that part. And the second part of that is you need to find a nice person who you want to work with, who you're going to be happy in the trenches with when it's 10 minutes to go and the building's going to try and kick you out and all these problems arise. You want someone who's going to fight your corner and say, yeah, I'll stay late, or yeah, I'll go and speak to the guy for you while I do. You need nice people. Unfortunately, again, all the people we got in that movie are lovely people, and we had such fun shooting it.
Yeah, I could tell, because I've always said, when you see films with actors and actresses who get the major parts, it's like they get it with all the auditions. It's like that person who's in that part was the perfect person. After years later, that integrity of the film still stands with that person or persons. One movie I think of as my favorite is Die Hard with Bruce Willis, John McClane. They nailed that perfectly with him. He was absolutely, I don't know if anybody else could have played that. And then Hans Gruber, played by,
Alan Rickman.
Yes, Alan Rickman. Yeah, I can't believe my favorite movie. Yeah, they nailed that as well. And that was his first film ever. So that dynamic between him and Rickman were just off the charts in that movie.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that film is they thought that was going to be a massive flop. So I think Bruce Willis, well, because at the time he'd only done Moonlighting, I think, and people thought, and he was sort of trying to compete with Stallone and Schwarzenegger, and people thought, who's this comedy actor? What's he doing in an action film? And I think they were prepared for that to fail. But it's an awesome movie, great director. Yeah, absolute classic Die Hard. I love all the Die Hards. I'll watch them, love Bruce Willis.
Yeah, and Alan Rickman, I've always said that he was I think he's the best villain of all time, in my opinion. And his performance then in that movie definitely elevated Bruce Willis in that movie. That movie would not have been as popular if he was not the villain in that movie, I'm convinced.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Alan Rickman's awesome. And also quite funny in that role as well. So he's not only a villain, there are moments in it that really make you laugh. So yeah, love Alan Rickman.
Yeah, and that was his first film too. He had done theater, but that was his first film. And they have all these little memes on Facebook here in the United States. Merry Christmas from Hans Gruber's team, and all the terrorists sitting looking at it. And I always reply back, best villains and villain of all time. So, that's phenomenal. So what would you say, what are some other projects you may have coming up down the pike as well? I know that you have some stuff going right now, but what are some things that you'd like to do down the road?
I think my next project I'm writing, and the Apocalypse Box had a big cast, one location, all indoors. I think the only thing I can tell you about the next one is it'll probably be a smaller cast, just for a bit of a change, and maybe it'll have more outside shooting involved. It'll still be a horror, maybe with more of a sci-fi twist on it, and I'm also looking at maybe doing a thriller. But it's like I say, it's the temptation is to get cracking straight away on another film, but I've got to get people to watch the Apocalypse Box first. So please do check it out.
Yes, please check out the Apocalypse Box. I promise you will be at the edge of your seat for the duration of the movie. And then Jim is also the host of the Honest Filmmaker podcast. And again, what does that podcast deal with? Now you deal with probably the inside workings of filmmaking and things of that nature.
Yeah. So a career in film, listen to it. Or even if you've always dreamt of making your own movie, there's loads of tips and tricks in there for people who have decided they're going to make a feature film. We hear from independent filmmakers out there who are doing it, first-time filmmakers who've just got their film onto streaming platforms, who've raised the money, they've got a tiny budget, they've borrowed some money from their aunt, for example, and they've shot this film on one camera, got their friends involved, and now that film's on a streaming platform. So anyone can do it. but the podcast gives you a real insight into how to do that and save yourself lots of hassle and lots of mistakes.
Is there one film, just real quick, is there one film that had that starting from scratch, borrowing from your aunt, that really made it popular? Can you think of one that's really started from nothing and became super popular?
I'd say there's a few. I mean, I'm a big fan. And again, it's a horror, and it isn't the first film they made, but Evil Dead 2 is a really good example of a film that was made for peanuts, but that's got so much style and the excitement, and it uses prosthetics, it uses, blood and guts and gore. But it's a really good example of something from way back when that got made by people who were independent filmmakers who just decided they were going to make a movie. These days, I mean, I'd cite something like the trick that people pull now is something like Paranormal Activity, where they make a film that hasn't got many effects in it, has got, fixed cameras that look like security cameras, but that is absolutely terrifying. So they've used the fact that they've not got a huge crew and a huge budget to their advantage. They've kind of created a movie around that, but also kept all the scares in there.
I like that too. The camera, the surveillance cameras inside Philip's box. I love that as well. Just the way little snippets of those little cameras looking down on them, like it was very scary. It was very it was wild. Jim Eaves, I want to thank you very much for coming on my podcast. Again, if you have not seen the movie The Apocalypse Box, watch it. It's on Amazon for purchase or renting. Jim is also the host of the Honest Filmmaker podcast as well, and he has been gracious enough. I'm really honored that you came on my podcast, Jim. I hope you enjoyed it. I really did. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.